Halloween in Maplewood was legendary. Every year, the rural town transformed into a hub of haunted houses, costume contests, and ghost tours. This year, the highlight was the haunted hayride, a new attraction hosted in the darkest, most remote part of the Maplewood forest. Rumor had it that the ride was no ordinary Halloween spook show. Locals whispered that the forest was cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who died tragically in a fire decades ago. Despite the rumors, a group of friends, Ethan, Mia, Ryan, and Claire, decided it was the perfect thrill to wrap up their Halloween night. The hayride started innocently enough. The four of them climbed aboard a creaky wooden wagon filled with hay, pulled by a pair of old, worn-out horses with ghostly white coats. As they settled in, they noticed an eerie, dense fog settling over the forest. It snaked around trees and blanketed the path ahead, muting the orange glow from the lanterns lining the trail. Their guide, an older man with a weathered face and a voice like gravel, warned them, "Stay seated and keep your hands inside. This forest has a life of its own." Ethan chuckled nervously. "They're really going all out for the scare factor, huh?" But as the wagon started moving, silence overtook their group. Only the creak of the wagon wheels and the occasional snort from the horses cut through the thick fog. Soon, they began to pass the first few haunted attractions. Wooden mannequins, dressed as scarecrows, witches, and skeletons. After a while, the friends relaxed, convinced it was all an elaborate show. But as the ride continued, the mannequins became unsettlingly real. Instead of lifeless figures, there were people in torn clothing, their faces smeared with ash and their eyes hollow, staring at them with expressions of torment. "That's weird," Mia whispered, clutching Ryan's arm. "They look real." "Just actors," Claire murmured, though her voice quivered. "It's all part of the act." The guide said nothing, his gaze fixed straight ahead, seemingly oblivious to the unnatural figures dotting their path. Then, a faint but sharp scream echoed through the trees, making everyone jump. The fog thickened, and soon the lanterns vanished from view, leaving only the dim light of the moon filtering through the skeletal branches above. Ryan leaned forward, trying to get the guide's attention. "Hey, was that supposed to happen?" The guide didn't respond. He seemed distant, his knuckles white as he gripped the reins. They passed another figure, a woman in a torn, blood-stained dress, clutching a broken doll. Her head lolled unnaturally to the side as they passed, and she raised one hand, as if pleading for help. "Help me," she whispered, her voice raspy and barely audible over the crackling of leaves beneath the wagon. The friends exchanged terrified glances, each feeling the same creeping dread settling in their stomachs. "This isn't funny anymore," Claire said, her voice trembling. As the ride progressed deeper into the forest, the figures grew closer to the wagon, their faces twisted in agony, their eyes filled with a rage that seemed to bore into the friends' souls. Then the wagon abruptly stopped. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, his voice hushed, his eyes darting around. The guide finally turned to face them, but his expression was void of warmth. His eyes were cold, almost empty. "I warned you about the forest." Without another word, he climbed down from the wagon and disappeared into the mist, leaving the four friends alone. Panic gripped them as they heard footsteps approaching from all directions, crunching on the dead leaves, growing closer and closer. They huddled together in the wagon, feeling utterly exposed. "Let's run," Ryan whispered. But just as he stood, something grabbed his wrist, a cold, clammy hand. Ryan looked down, and to his horror, one of the actors had latched onto him. Its face was ghastly, pale and gaunt, with sunken eyes staring blankly. Its grip was impossibly strong, No, you can't leave, the figure rasped. We waited. So long. Ryan struggled, yanking his arm free and stumbling back into the wagon. The figure didn't move, but its gaze followed him, hollow eyes boring into him. The others watched in horror as more figures emerged from the mist surrounding the wagon. They were no longer stationary. They were walking toward them, hands outstretched, their faces twisted in expressions of anger and pain. The friends screamed as the figures climbed onto the wagon, their cold hands grabbing and clawing, pulling at their clothes, their hair, dragging them down. Mia felt herself slipping, her hands clutching desperately at the edge of the wagon. "Get off me!" she shrieked, kicking at the ghostly figures. But they were relentless, their grip like iron. Ethan, in a last-ditch attempt, pulled a flashlight from his pocket and shone it at the figures. For a moment they recoiled, their faces contorting in pain, but they quickly surged forward again, unaffected by the feeble light. "Why? Are you doing this?" Claire cried, her voice barely above a whisper. A figure leaned close, its face inches from hers. Its voice was barely a hiss, dripping with bitterness. "They burned us alive, locked us in the barn, left us to die." The friends froze, a chilling realization settling over them. These weren't actors. They were spirits, the remnants of people who had met a terrible fate in this very forest. "We're sorry," Ethan shouted, his voice trembling. "We didn't know." But the spirits didn't seem to care. Their eyes glowed with a hunger for vengeance, a desire to make someone, anyone, suffer as they had. The fog thickened, swirling around them like a living thing, trapping them in the wagon. Ethan, thinking quickly, turned to his friends. "We need to get out of here. Run into the forest. It's our only chance." With a final push, they broke free of the spirit's grasp and leaped from the wagon, sprinting blindly into the dense forest. The fog clung to them, the chilling whispers of the dead echoing in their ears as they stumbled over roots and branches, desperately trying to escape. One by one, they lost track of each other in the fog. Mia could hear the others calling, but their voices grew fainter, distorted by the mist. She ran until her lungs burned, until the world seemed to blur around her. Finally, she broke through the edge of the forest, collapsing on the ground, gasping for breath. She looked around, but the others were nowhere in sight. The fog began to dissipate, and the forest was silent once more. Mia waited, her heart pounding, but no one else emerged from the trees. She was alone. Shivering, she made her way back to town, her mind reeling from the horror she had just experienced. No one believed her story. Her friends were simply missing, presumed lost in the woods. But Mia knew the truth. The spirits of Maplewood Forest were real, and they were still waiting for those foolish enough to enter their domain, seeking the souls of the living to avenge the tragedy of their deaths. Every Halloween, the small town of Ravenswood transformed into a haven of dark legends and eerie festivities. The townspeople celebrated with elaborate costumes, haunted house tours, and the infamous Witch's Walk, a guided tour to the old crumbling Ashwood house on the edge of town. Ashwood House had a sinister past. The townsfolk claimed it was cursed, haunted by the spirit of a witch named Agatha Blackwell, who was executed centuries ago for practicing dark magic. This year, a group of teenagers, Evan, Lucas, Mia, and Rachel, decided to make the Halloween festival unforgettable. Lucas dared them to spend the night inside Ashwood House, challenging their courage and testing the tales they'd heard since childhood. They laughed it off at first, treating it as just another urban legend. But the excitement of doing something dangerous made them agree. They packed some flashlights, snacks, and a deck of cards, intending to make a night of it. As the sun set on Halloween, the group made their way to the Ashwood House. The air was thick with mist, and an eerie silence blanketed the surroundings. The house loomed, dark and foreboding, silhouetted against the harvest moon. Ivy climbed up its decaying walls, and shattered windows gaped like hollow eyes. "Who's scared?" Lucas taunted as they entered the house. The others rolled their eyes, brushing off the prickling sense of unease that crept up their spines. They found a dusty parlor and set up a makeshift circle of candles, laughing and daring each other to explore the empty rooms. It was all fun and games. Until midnight. As the clock struck 12, a chill swept through the room, extinguishing their candles in an instant. A soft, almost whispering chant echoed through the walls. The teenagers looked at each other, suddenly alert, their hearts pounding. "Did you hear that?" Mia's voice trembled. Before anyone could answer, a cold breeze stirred, and the scent of burning herbs filled the room. A figure appeared in the doorway, a shadowy silhouette of a woman in tattered, old-fashioned clothing, her eyes hollow and dark. It was Agatha Blackwell. The teenagers froze in terror as her voice resonated through the air, low and venomous. "Intruders in my domain. So you seek the witch, do you?" "No, we didn't mean to," Rachel stammered, her face pale with fear. But Agatha only laughed, a harsh, bone-chilling sound. She raised a bony finger, pointing at each of them in turn. "A curse upon you, foolish children. My wrath shall be your nightmare." And just like that, she vanished, leaving the teenagers in the pitch black of the haunted house. They scrambled to relight their flashlights, but their hands shook as cold dread gripped them. Each one could feel the curse settling over them like a suffocating weight. They hurried back to the parlor to regroup, but as they glanced around, they noticed something horrifying. They weren't alone anymore. Shadows seemed to move, twisting in the flickering light, and they could hear faint whispers coming from the walls. The first sign of the curse's wrath came swiftly. Evan felt a sharp, icy claw scratch at his arm. He looked down, horrified to see red welts forming across his skin, as if unseen hands were clawing at him. He stumbled back, gasping in pain. The others watched, helpless, as the invisible force continued to torment him. His eyes widened with terror, and he cried out, "It's her! She's here! She's clawing at me!" Desperate, they tried to run to another room, hoping to escape, but as they reached the hall, the doors slammed shut around them, trapping them in a maze of darkness. The walls seemed to close in, and the once empty house was now filled with guttural whispers that chanted in an ancient, unknown language. Mia was the next to fall under Agatha's curse. She suddenly felt her body growing unbearably hot. Beads of sweat rolled down her face as her skin seemed to burn with invisible flames. She screamed, clawing at her arms, desperate to put out the fire only she could feel. Her friends tried to console her, but they could do nothing as Mia writhed in agony. "Please make it stop," she sobbed, her eyes filled with panic. Desperate to end the horror, Lucas decided to confront the witch. He shouted into the dark, "Agatha, what do you want? Tell us what we need to do to break the curse." In the silence that followed, a single word echoed back to them, as cold as the grave: "Confess." Confused and terrified, the group struggled to understand what the witch meant. But as they moved through the darkened house, they came across a dusty, ancient journal lying on a table. It seemed untouched for centuries. The cover was marked with strange symbols, and when they opened it, they found entries written in Agatha's own hand. The journal revealed the witch's dark past. Agatha had been wrongfully accused of witchcraft by the town's leaders centuries ago. In reality, she had only been a healer, misunderstood by a town that feared her powers. Before her execution, Agatha had placed a curse on Ravenswood, vowing that anyone who disrespected her memory would suffer as she did. It became clear they had to find a way to honor her, to right the wrongs of the past. In a last-ditch effort to end the curse, Rachel stood in the center of the room, her voice trembling but determined. "Agatha Blackwell," she called out, "we're sorry for the pain our town caused you. You were wronged, and we are here to make it right. We confess our ignorance and ask for your forgiveness." For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the oppressive darkness began to lift. The whispers faded, and the house returned to its eerie silence. Just as they thought they might be free, Agatha's spirit appeared once more. Her ghostly face softened, the rage in her eyes dimming. "Your confession has lifted the weight of my curse. But beware," she warned. "Respect the past, or my wrath will return." With that, Agatha's spirit faded, leaving them alone in the silence of the house. The teenagers wasted no time, stumbling out of Ashwood House and into the chilly night air. The curse had been lifted, but they knew they would never forget the horrors they had endured. They had dared to disrespect a memory, and Agatha's vengeance had taught them a lesson they would never forget. As they looked back at the looming silhouette of Ashwood House, they silently vowed never to return. And every Halloween that followed, they would share their story, a warning to those who might think to mock the dead. For in Ravenswood, the past never truly dies. It waits, patient and vengeful, for those who dare to disturb it. In the heart of the quaint village of West Hollow, October brought more than a chill to the air. It brought excitement, mystery, and something far darker. Every Halloween, the villagers would flock to the famous pumpkin patch, a sprawling field lined with twisting vines and plump orange pumpkins, some so big they could hardly be lifted. For years, the pumpkin patch had been the centerpiece of Halloween festivities, a cherished tradition where families carved pumpkins, children hunted for treats, and friends gathered around bonfires. But few knew the truth, lurking within its twisting paths and towering stalks. The pumpkin patch held a dark secret, and this Halloween, it was about to be revealed. Lured by the whispers of the upcoming Halloween night, 4 friends, Emma, Alex, Lucy, and Ben, made their way to the pumpkin patch just before dusk. They were armed with flashlights and an insatiable curiosity, intent on uncovering the rumors that had plagued the village for years. People talked of a masked figure who'd been seen wandering the fields, and tales of villagers who disappeared, their faces never seen again, were shared in hushed voices. The group thought these stories were nothing but a Halloween scare tactic, a way to heighten the eerie atmosphere. But soon, they'd find out the stories were terrifyingly real. As they stepped into the maze of corn stalks and pumpkin-laden rows, Emma noticed something strange. A worn and tattered scarecrow near the entrance, its head replaced by a cracked, grotesque pumpkin face. The pumpkin had jagged teeth carved into it, and the deep-set eyes seemed to follow them as they passed by. Emma shivered and pointed it out to the others. "Creepy. But someone probably did it to scare people," Ben shrugged. They laughed it off and continued deeper into the patch, winding their way through the narrow paths. Their laughter faded as they reached the center, where they found a small deserted cabin. Outside the cabin, an old lantern hung by a thread, its glass smeared with something dark and sticky. Inside, they saw something even more disturbing, an assortment of tools, all with dried, rust-colored stains. Knives, hooks, and an old axe rested on a table, each one sharper than the last. Scattered across the floor were photographs of the missing villagers, their faces scratched out, eyes blackened in every photo. At the bottom of the pile was a new picture, Emma's face, eyes scratched out, and a sinister smile carved in red ink. Emma's hands trembled as she held the photo. This can't be real," she whispered, looking around as fear clenched her stomach. They heard a faint crunching sound from outside. They spun around, their flashlights darting across the shadows, illuminating the grotesque pumpkin scarecrow, now standing eerily close to the cabin. It hadn't been there before. "Who's there?" Alex called out, but the only response was silence. The scarecrow's head tilted to one side as if listening, its carved mouth appearing wider, more sinister, in the faint glow of their lights. Suddenly, a scream pierced the night. It was high-pitched and came from somewhere deeper within the maze. Without thinking, the friends bolted out of the cabin and ran in the direction of the scream, their flashlights bouncing wildly as they maneuvered through the dark. The maze seemed to twist and turn in ways it hadn't before, and soon they found themselves lost. Just when they were about to give up, they stumbled upon a clearing. In the middle of the clearing lay an old, abandoned well. Lucy stepped closer to examine it, and a stench hit them, foul and sickly sweet. Ben shone his flashlight down the well, revealing something glistening at the bottom. As he focused, he saw it wasn't water. It was a pile of bodies, their faces frozen in horror, limbs twisted unnaturally. The friends staggered back, horrified, as the realization set in. The missing villagers were buried beneath the pumpkin patch. They were about to flee when a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. The pumpkin-headed scarecrow stepped out of the darkness, dragging a bloodied sickle behind him, its blade scraping against the earth. The scarecrow wasn't just a Halloween decoration. It was the killer, hiding in plain sight, using the festivities to cloak his monstrous acts. "Run!" Emma screamed, her voice cracking as they bolted into the maze. The friends sprinted through the rows, adrenaline surging as the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. The killer moved silently, but the dragging sound of the sickle scraped closer with every turn. The twisted paths of the pumpkin patch disoriented them, and they found themselves cornered in a dead end, their only exit blocked by the pumpkin-headed figure. In a panic, Alex grabbed a broken wooden stake lying nearby and lunged at the killer, aiming for his pumpkin head. But the killer swatted him aside with terrifying strength, and Alex crumpled to the ground. Lucy screamed, grabbing Emma's hand as they tried to pull Alex up. Ben, seeing an opportunity, hurled his flashlight at the scarecrow, hitting it square in the pumpkin face. The pumpkin head cracked, revealing a glimpse of the true face beneath. A twisted visage with hollow eyes, the skin pale and cold, lips stretched into a menacing grin. "Emma, go!" Ben yelled, trying to hold off the killer. With Alex leaning on them, Emma and Lucy staggered out of the maze, leaving Ben behind. They heard a sickening crunch, and Ben's scream cut through the night. Tears streamed down their faces as they forced themselves to keep moving. Finally, they broke free from the pumpkin patch, stumbling onto the main road. They flagged down the first car they saw, a local farmer on his way back to the village. Breathlessly, they told him about the bodies, the killer, and their friend, Ben. The authorities arrived, scouring the pumpkin patch until dawn, but they found no trace of Ben or the scarecrow. The bodies at the well were gone, as if erased overnight, and the sinister tools in the cabin had vanished. The village wrote off their story as hysteria, a Halloween prank gone wrong. But Emma, Alex, and Lucy knew the truth. They had looked into the face of pure evil, hidden beneath a pumpkin mask. Each Halloween after that, the villagers continued to celebrate in the patch, unaware of the real horror hiding in the shadows. But the survivors never returned. And as the years passed, more villagers vanished, their faces disappearing from family photos, their memories fading into whispered legends of the Pumpkin Patch Massacre.